So this video is going to focus on the settings of the form builder. And so how this is going to work is you will see over here on the left-hand side, we are actually in the form builder itself within the CMS. And then over here on the right-hand side is the actual form that I'm going to be referencing. And so you can see that I have a form created called mailing list. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on this button that you see here that says settings, and I'm going to walk through all the different settings that we have within the form builder. So the first box you have here is the title, and so you can see I have this filled out as mailing list, and you can see over here that it's also called mailing list here. So whatever you type in this box will show up at the top over here. Next will be the description, and whatever you fill in for the description of the form will be the first paragraph you see at the very top of the form. So perhaps this would be a description of what the form is or what you're looking to gain from people filling out this form. So whatever you fill out here will be at the very top of the form that you're asking people to fill out. The next section is for headers, and this is very similar to what the CMS has. And so you can customize how you want the headers to be shown. So do you want to use the default setting, which is in this case, do not display headers, display all the headers, only show specific headers I have from a list, and you can see that's the list that it generated, or you can choose to do not display any headers. So this is completely customizable and whatever you want. Then the URL that you see here, this is going to be the URL of the form once the form is live. And so if it's still in a draft state or pending approval state, this link will not work, and it will only work for people who have access to the form in the CMS. Once the form is live, then this will be the URL that you would then be able to send in an email or in a newsletter, however you want to send it. This is what you would want to copy and send to people. Next, we're going to talk about some of the logic that you can have with the form. So the first thing that you see here is start date. So can the form be open immediately, or does the form have a specific start date? And so as a reminder, this is assuming that the form is approved. If it's not approved, then it won't be live no matter what. And so for this example, let's say that this form has a start date a couple days ahead, and then we can have what text will show before the form is displayed. So let me type in something here. And so you can see I've added in some text that just says, thank you for your interest in this form. And so what I will do now is I'm going to go down and save this form. So I've just saved that. And now if I refresh this page, you will see that the form is not available, and says that text that I typed in right here now displays, and it will go away once the form goes live, which we've set as this date and time. So now the opposite of that is I'm going to say that this form is open immediately. You can also have an end date for the form. And so if you want the form to close on a particular date, so let's say that we go back a day, and then the same can be said here. So I'm going to type in something for the text to display after the form is closed. So now I have some text to display saying that the form is closed. And so I'm going to save our changes again and show you what that looks like. So that's saved. I'm going to come over to our form and refresh it. And you can see that now it says that the form is closed and the person's too late. You should have filled it out sooner. And that's reflected here. So you can have a start date or an end date for the particular form. And again, this is assuming that the form is live and not in a draft state or a pending approval state. The next logic that you can change deals with permissions. And so you have two different options here. First being that everyone can view the form, and the second being that only people with protected access can view the form. If you need a refresher on how protected access works, I'd recommend going to the web team page. And on the web team page underneath CMS is a CMS 201 training. And this will talk to you and show you all about protected access right here. So with protected access, you can choose which list that you've created. And so for this example, let's say that I want all faculty and staff to be the only ones that can have access to this particular form. Another thing that you could also do is you can also change the maximum number of responses per person. And so let's just say, for example, you want to create a ballot or you want to create a voting system. With protected access on, the person has to sign into the form to fill it out, and with this selected, they can only fill out that form once. So now that you see I've got this checked for all faculty and staff and the maximum number of responses for one, when I refresh my form, you'll see that I'm now forced to log in. And so now if I log in, here's my form, and I'm going to fill this out quickly. So I filled it out, and I'm going to click on Submit. And now you can see that I've got a thank you page, and I've successfully filled out the form. So now if I go and try to refill that form out again, you'll see that it tells me that I've already completed the maximum number of submissions for this form. Now you can change this text that a person sees here from this box here. So if I wanted to add more detail such as contact so-and-so or email this person, I can do that if I want to. So this is how you would have a protected access on the form and limit the number of responses. So for our example, I'm going to uncheck the protected access and say that everyone can view this. And now the next option is, do you want to limit the number of registrations? And so you have two options for this. There is no limit to the number of registrations, meaning an infinite amount of people can sign up, or this form has a maximum number of registrations available. So for this example, I've chosen that the maximum number of registrations available is 16, meaning there are 16 people that can fill out this form. This next option is, should the form publicly display the number of registrations available, yes or no? And then the next is, what text will be shown once the maximum number of registrations can be reached. So here's an example of this. So I have this form, and I currently have 15 people filled out. And I know that because if I go back to the form builder page, I can see underneath responses it says 15 of 16. So I know that there's only room for one more person. Now, you would be able to see that as an administrator, but the person who is filling this out would see on the page this text right here. There are 1 of 16 registrations available. So I'm going to fill this out real quick. Fill that out, and I'm going to click on Submit. And so now you can see that my submission has been successful. And so now what I want to show you is, with that last response, if I go back to our form builder main page, you can see that I have 16 of 16 responses filled out. So there's no more room for another person to fill out this form. So if I were to try and go back to this page, you will see that it says the maximum number of registrations has been reached. And so if you remember underneath the settings here, we said that the maximum number of registrations is 16, and you can change the text that you see here on this box right here within this text box. So you can add in any more detail if you want to. The next option underneath the logic is for URL redirect. This says that when this is filled out, when someone goes to this form, it will send them to this URL. So what this means is, as an example, let's say that this is a mailing list that I've created for 2019. Now I want to create a new mailing list for 2020. However, some people may still have the 2019 mailing list bookmarked or referenced in a marketing material, and the worry is that someone could potentially go to the wrong form. You want them to go to the new updated form, but they still have the old link. So what you can do is you can change this URL redirect to add in any URL that you want. So ideally, I would put in the updated form in this redirect. However, for this example, to show you how this works, I'm going to enter in the gvsu.edu webpage. So now that I've filled that in there, I'm going to click on Submit. And now when I refresh this page, you will see that it now instead takes me to gvsu.edu instead of our form. So to turn this off, I'm going to go back into our settings, and I'm going to just empty out this field here and click on Submit. Now when I refresh this page, you will see that we're brought back to our original form. The next section here is the additional registrant options. You have two different options for guest registrations. And the first is that people can only complete the form for themselves, or people can complete this form for themselves and additional guests. So this would be a perfect way for example, a golf outing where you have teams of 4 people, but you don't want to have all 4 people to have to come and fill out the form. Instead, you would have one person come and fill out the form, and then for how many additional guests can the person register for this form, we would change this to 3. And now you can also change the word guests to a different plural word. So let's just say, for example, in my case, let's say we're going to change this to golfers, and this one will change to golfer. So now that I've made those changes, I'm going to hit save and down here at the bottom and submit that. And so now when I refresh this page, you can see at the very bottom of this page, we have a section for guests, and it asks how many additional golfers are you registering. And so again, we changed that underneath the settings in this additional registrant options. And so I can choose then between 0, 1, 2, and 3. And you will see later in the video on how to add content to these drop downs once you get into the actual form. Next, we're going to talk about the payment options. So you have 4 different payment methods: no payment, credit cards, checks, and credit cards and checks. So let's work on the example of doing both the credit cards and checks. So the first thing that you'll need to do is you'll need to have your FOAP account created and set up on the CMS. If you need help with that, please reach out to the web team and we can help you out. For this example, we're just using a test FOAP account. And so you can see the first box here is asking which account to choose. And so I've selected the test account that we have. The next is which FOAP account to use. And so you can use the default one there, or you can do a custom FOAP in which you need to enter in the number. For this example, I'm just going to use the default. Now the next box is details on where to send the check. So if you have the credit cards and checks or just the checks option filled out, that box will appear. And so here you can then type in the address, the name, etc. So I'll fill that out here quickly. And so now you can see that the address is then filled into this box. So this will then be displayed once the person submits the form as a reminder of where to send the check. The next box here is, will there be an early bird discount for registering before a certain date? So as an example, let's say that we're going to have an event on November 1, and today is September 28th. You can make it so that if somebody signs up before a certain date, so let's just say October 15th. So anybody that signs up before October 15th will be eligible for the early bird price. Once you go to create the form, you'll then have the option for the early bird price within there. And so we are going to say that October 15th is the early bird cutoff date. Now this next box here is, will there be an early bird discount limit to the number of registrations? And so let's say that you only want the first 10 people to be eligible for the early bird. After 10 people, the early bird rate is gone. So you can choose that number from this drop down here. So just to recap, the early bird rate will apply based off of the date or the registration, whichever comes first. So if there are 10 people that have registered before October 15th, the early bird rate would then stop. Or if it reaches the date of October 15, then the early bird rate would stop on that date. Next is the option for, will there be a cost for each registered person? It gives a little paragraph here that explains what that means. And so what this means is that if you want a different cost for each person registered, so for example, if there's a different price for a staff member compared to a faculty member compared to a student, you would want to choose no in this instance. If you have one price for everybody and it doesn't matter who the person is, it's just one set cost, you would change this to yes. When you change that to yes, you'll see then that the early bird option then becomes an option because we're having just one set price. If we have this set to no, you would then need to make your form use a multiple select option, and then you'll be able to choose the different funds when you choose that option. So for our example, I'm going to say yes, and let's say that the early bird cost is $10, and then the regular cost is $15. The next box here is, will this form collect funds that could be considered a donation or gift? You would simply choose yes or no in this instance. If you choose yes, then all the funds collected as a donation must use the GVSU Development Office FOB so that they can be issued a donation receipt. If you don't see that account as an option, please let us know and we can get that activated for you. The last thing that you see in this section is for coupons. And so if I click on this button that says Add Coupon, you can see that this new box appears. And so you can add a coupon to a particular event and have a person enter in a code, which then would give them either a percentage off, a dollar amount off, or a dollar amount off for each guest. So as an example, let's say somebody wins a raffle and the prize is that they get half off our event. And so let's say that we create a code and we'll just call this code half. And then you give it a title. So we'll say half off our event. And then we would need to choose the type. And so for this one, we're going to say that it is a percentage off, and we're going to say 50%. Now you can also make it so that it can be used only one time, or up to 25, or there is no limit. And so for this particular example, we're going to say that there's a maximum usage of 1. And so now when somebody goes and signs up for the event, that particular person can enter in the code half, and their price would then be 50% off whatever it is you marked it up here. The last section that you see here is the thank you page. So when a person fills out the form, this will be what appears on the next page. And so as a note, that this is not what will be sent in the email confirmation. So if you need to have information in both the thank you page and in the email confirmation, which I'll show you in just a second, just be sure to note it in both. This last little section that you see is for the email confirmation. And so an email confirmation will go out if you ask for an email address on the form, or if the form collects a payment via credit card. So the first box that you see here is who the email will be from. It's important that you make this a valid email, because if a person receives an email and then clicks reply, you will want that reply to go to the correct spot. So then you can also enter in who you want the email to come from, the name. So I just named this Zach Test Site. This would be the subject of the email, and then this would be the actual content that shows up when the email is sent. So that fills out all the email confirmation information, but then you also will have these settings here for some of the logic. And so this first question is, should the confirmation email contain the questions and answers the person filling out the form provided? So you can say yes or no. Think of this as kind of a receipt. And so the person who filled out the form would then also get a copy of all the information that they filled out. Next is, would you like anyone to receive an email whenever the form is submitted? So you have the option of yes or no. And so if you enter in yes, you can then type in the email address of the person you want to send an email to. Now, what's important to note is that the email that gets sent only states that there's a new submission, and then there'll be a link for the person to log into the CMS to view that submission. So it would only make sense to fill out a person with a GVSU email account who has access to the CMS form builder. And so in this example, I put in my Gmail account. That would not be a good example. And instead, let's put in my Grand Valley account, because this is the account I use to sign into the CMS. The next box that you see is, would you like anyone to receive an email whenever an admin adds a comment or note to a response? Yes or no? And so let me show you what this means. So I'm going to enlarge this window here. This is our form builder of the form that we're working on. And so if I click on this box here that says responses, you'll see these are all the responses we have for all the different people that have filled out this form. And so let's just say, for example, we pick this first one and we click on this magnifying glass to view. When you view the response and you scroll down, you're able to add in some comments or notes. So for example, I can just add in hello and then click submit. And so now that I've added in a comment there, if I go back and view the responses, you'll see that there's this little box here that says comments notes. So now that I've added in a note in the comment into that particular response, if this is checked yes, and then I fill out an email address, this person would get an email indicating that there is a note or response within the form builder. So you can choose no or yes for this. If somebody makes a comment, they would get a notification that a comment's been made. Also, as a note, that the comments that you fill out on these responses are not accessible to the public. They're only visible by administrators. So this is a great way for you to pass notes back and forth between a response, and nobody will see it except for those administrators. The next box that you see here is, would you like an email to go out on a specific date as a reminder? So we have this event that's going to be happening on October 15th. Let's say you want an email reminder a week before. If you click yes here, you can then fill out when you want the email to go out. So we'll say the 8th. You can enter in the subject. So we can say golf outing reminder. And then we can put in the content of the email. So whatever we fill out here, then email will go out on that date as a reminder. And then the opposite of that is this last option that you see, which is, would you like an email to go out on a specific date as a follow-up? So let's just say, for example, you have a survey that you want to send out to the people who attended this outing. You can change this option to say yes, and you would fill out the exact same information. So again, if the event is on the 15th, let's say you want the follow-up email to go out the next day, the 16th. Enter in your subject, you enter in your email, and then the day after the event, that person will receive this email with the survey or a thank you, whatever you want to put in there. And that does it for the settings of the form builder. Now, what's important to know about the settings is that there are some options that cannot be changed once the form is approved, but a lot of these settings can be changed even if the form is approved. So the next section of the video will be actually talking about the content of the form, and which can't be changed once it's been approved. So just remember that the settings, there are some things in this page that can be changed once the form has been approved. So with those changes made, I'm going to click on submit and save this form, and I'm going to show you what we have just done within the form. So I'll refresh our page here. And so I'm going to fill out the information, and then it's going to ask how many additional golfers we're registering. I'm going to say 2. And so as a reminder, the reason that we can select additional golfers up to 3 is because in the settings, we changed the guest registrations that people can complete this form for themselves and additional guests. So we're going to register 2 additional golfers, and now I'm going to click on continue. Now you'll see that we're brought to a payment page. The reason we're brought to a payment page is because with the payment options, we've selected credit cards and checks. So with this option selected, you see that we have both the option for credit card and the option for check. So if we go back to the credit card, you will see that the cost per golfer is $10 times 3. The reason it is $10 is because we have the early bird cutoff enabled with this box here, and the early bird cost is $10 compared to the regular cost of $15. If I were to sign up for this event after October 15, it would then be $15. Now the last thing is that up here you'll see this box that says click here if you have a coupon code. So I'm going to click on this box and I'm going to type in the code half and then click apply. And now you will see that because we entered in half, the discount has been 50%. And the reason it's 50% is because we entered in this coupon. Now, after I click submit, that coupon will no longer be able to be used because it has a maximum use of 1 time. So the first box you see over here is this plus sign, and it is for adding a section to help organize the questions. So if you look over on the example form, this blue box underneath the volunteer sign up, this is an example of a section. So if I click on this button, you will see that an unnamed section gets added, and then I can double click on it, or I can click on the edit button and then give the section a name. So for example, we'll call this the volunteer sign up, and then hit save. And now we have a section for this volunteer sign up. The next button you see is for adding a text box. So if I click on that, you'll see that it adds in an unnamed text box. So you can then click on the pencil icon to edit it. You can click on the plus sign and this would copy the question. Or you can click on the trash can in which it will delete that particular text box. So if I double click on it, you'll see that it brings up this window, and the first empty box here asks for questions. So as an example, one of the questions you could ask for would be first name. The next box is required, yes or no. So is this field required to be filled out in order to submit the form? You will know that if a field is required if it has an asterisk next to it. So we'll make this field required, yes. And then once you get to type, there's a bunch of different options. So I'm going to walk through each one of these. So when I go to the type box and I choose email, you will see that now we're given a few different options. The first checkbox here says send a receipt to this email. And if you have this box checked, what will happen is when the person comes to this form and fills it out, they type in their email, and when they click on submit, they will receive an email saying you have filled out this form. So if you leave this check, the person will receive an email. If you leave it unchecked, they will not receive an email. The next box is require the user to type in their email twice to confirm it's correct. So again, if you look at this form over here on the right-hand side, you can see that we have a text box for email, but then we also have a text box for email confirmation. So this makes sure that the person types in their email address correctly. And then the last box that you see over here is require the email to end with @gvsu.edu or @mail.gvsu.edu. So this will require the person filling out the form to use their Grand Valley email. And this will also make it so that people who don't have a Grand Valley email, they cannot fill out the form. So for example, if you have a Gmail, if this box is checked, you cannot use that email address for this particular form. The next type underneath email is for FOAP. And so if I click on there, you can see there are no additional options that need to be filled out for the FOAP number. And as an example over here on our form, you can see in this text box here, it's asking for the FOAP number, and it has the X's that are in there that indicate that you have to type in the number. So that is how you add the FOAP number into your form. The next type that we're going to talk about is the G number. The G number is a selection here, and you can see as an example over here on our form, this is the G number field. So it's important that if you are asking for an individual's G number that you use this type as opposed to using a text box. The reason you want to use this G number is because when the person submits the form, there are security measures taking place so that the entire G number is not shown in their response. And so if you don't do that and you use a text box, the text box then does not have any security and the entire G number will be shown in the submission. So it is important that if you are asking for a G number that you use the G number type. The next drop down that you can select under type is for phone number. And you can see once you select phone, there's not any additional options or questions that you need to answer. And when you choose phone, you will see that in the example form that the text is laid out in such that a phone number with the X is grayed out. So if you're asking for a phone number, make sure to use the phone type. The next drop down underneath type is for text. If you select text, this is a very simple text box that you can type in. And so on our example form over here on the right-hand side, you can see first name, last name, and text are essentially all text boxes. It allows a person filling out the form to type in whatever it is they want with a limited amount of characters. And so we also have a text area option that I will show later in the video that will allow the person filling out the form to type in a longer answer, more of an essay paragraph type. So the text type here was great for short answers that are limited in characters. The next option type is for website address. When you select this, it will then show up on the form as you see in this example here, where the person then is given this example URL within the website address. So this is an easy way for somebody to type in a URL or a website within the form. The last type that I want to talk about in the text box is for zip code. And so if I click on zip code, you will see that there's an additional question here for country. So I'm going to break this up into two sections. The first being is that if you need to strictly ask for a zip code, you select this from the type, and then on our example form, I will show you that it shows up right here underneath zip code, and you can see it's got the 5 X's there for the 5-digit zip code. Now, you also will notice that it has country question here, and it says you do not have any country questions on your form. So I'm going to click on save. And then back at the form, there's this button here, which says states, majors, semesters, etc. If I click on that, it adds in another box. And if I double click on it, we'll change the question to say country. And underneath the type, we're going to select country. And now if I click on save, you will see that we have a box for zip code and a box for country. Now, if I go back to our zip code box, you will see that now the country question has a drop down, and you can choose which country the volunteer sign up that we want to have. So then I can click on save. So back at our example form, you can see we've got the zip code box here that a person can type in, and then there's also a box down here that's a drop down in which the person can select the country, whichever they want to select. Moving on, the next box that you see on the right-hand side here is for the text area. And so if I add in a text area, you can see it adds this into our form builder. I double click on it, and I have to give it a name. So the question we'll just call this, for our example, we'll call this statement. And what it is this is a larger text box, if you look over here in my example, where you could ask a person filling out the form for example, a personal statement, or perhaps you want them to write something about themselves. This is for longer text, more essay style. And you can limit the number of words or characters. Back in my configuration over here on the left-hand side, I can click on this drop down and I can say limit on characters or limits on words. And so let's just say, for example, with the statement you want the person to provide, you want it to be more than 50 words but less than 200. So you could say a minimum of 50 and a maximum of 200. And so now I refresh this page over here on the right-hand side, and you can see underneath this text area we have, please enter 50 to 200 words. You currently have 0. And so I can type in word, and you can see now it's jumped up to 1. So this gives the person typing a counter as they're typing, and we tell them that you need a minimum of 50, a maximum of 200. So that is the text area for the form builder. Okay, the next option that you can add in the form builder is this box here, which is for numerics or a number. So if I click on this, you'll see that it adds it into our form builder. And then if I double click on it to edit it, the first box here asks for the question. So for our example, I'm going to be asking for the person who is filling it out for their GPA. So for the question, I enter in GPA. The next option here is for whether or not it's required, yes or no. And then underneath type, you have 3 different number options that you can choose. Whole number, where there's 0 decimals, decimal numbers with 2, or a decimal number with 5. So in our case, we want the GPA, so we want to use 2 decimal numbers. Now you can also enter in a minimum value or a maximum value. So for our example where we're asking for the GPA, we're going to want to specify a maximum value of 4.0. So now if you look over here on the right-hand side, you will see that there's a blank for the GPA, and then we have to enter in a value that is less than or equal to 4. And so then you can also see that it has the X's in the box so that the person filling it out knows that they have to put in a 3-digit number with the 2 decimals. All right, the next thing we're going to focus on is this option here, which is for date, time, and year. So if I click on this to add it to our form builder, you'll see that it's now added, and then I'm going to double click on it to edit. So for this example, let's say that I'm asking the person, when were you born? And we want to know the date that they were born, and we want to know also the time. So for our question, we're going to type in, when were you born? We can ask if we want it to be required, yes or no. And then this is the drop down here that you'll be able to select. So you have 4 different options. You have date and time, you have date, you have time, and you also have year. So for this example, we're going to choose the first one, which is date and time. You're then able to choose the beginning year, so the start year that you want to select. So for our example, we'll keep this at 1900. And then you could also choose when you want the year to end. So we're going to just keep that at 2020. You could also choose the year order, so if you want it to be ascending or descending. So let's just say for our example, we're going to change that to ascending. And then when the person fills out, you're able to select how many specific minutes you want it to be narrowed down to. So you can have it down to 1 minute all the way up to 30. So let's say we want to be as specific as possible. We're going to say 1 minute step there. Okay, so now that we've done that, we're going to hit save. Now let me show you what this looks like in our form here. So you see in this box here, we're asking when were you born? And so a person then would be able to click in here and choose all the appropriate fields. And then they can specify the time. So let's just say I was born at 1:21 a.m. So that allows the person to enter in the date and the time. And that is due to this form here. We are saying we're asking for date and time. The next option you can choose in this dropdown is for date. And so let's say for this example, we want to ask when the person's wedding anniversary is. So we've changed the question to ask for wedding anniversary. You can change the start date and the end date if you want to. We're going to keep this the same as it is. And if you hit save, now let's go over to our example form. And you'll see here we have this drop down for wedding anniversary. So now I can select the date, and that's the only thing it's asking for. It's just asking for the date. So the person filling out the form can fill in just that date and then click submit. Now the next option is for time. So if I change this drop down here for time, you can see then the next option that you can choose is for minute step. So you can choose what the frequency is for the minute. So you can do 1 minute, 5 minute, etc., all the way up to 30. So for this example, let's say we're going to do a 30-minute step. So we've changed that to 30. I'm going to click on Save Changes. And now if I go over to our example form, which I just refreshed, you can see underneath this field that we've edited for time, if I click on this drop down, let's say that whatever the event is, we want the person to enter in the time. The person can type in a 6, and then they have half-hour increments or different steps, and then they can choose AM or PM. So this would be used if you want the person filling out the form to be able to select a specific time, and you could do that based off of the different steps like we saw in this screen right here. And then the next one that is in this dropdown is for the year. And so let's just say for our example, we want to ask the person filling it out, when did you graduate high school? And so we're not asking for a specific date or time, we just want the year. And so we're going to have the start year as 1900. Let's just say we're only looking for people who have graduated in the past 20 years. And so let's just say we start this with the year 2000, and then it ends in the year 2020. So now if I hit save, I come over to our test form over here on the right-hand side, and you'll see this text box here with the drop-down for year. And if I click on it, you will see now it only lists the last 20 years, in which then the person can select whichever the year they want to when they're submitting the form. The next thing I want to talk about with the form builder is this box here, which is for the multiple select. So if I add this into our form, and then I double click on it to edit, what I want to focus on right at the beginning of this is to do a brief overview of the different types of multiple selects you can choose. There's 4 different options. You can have a checkbox, a drop-down, a radio button, or a rating scale like a Likert. And so keeping that in mind, the 4 different multiple select options, let me show you a preview of how this looks. So in this example form, this first section here is using the checkboxes. So if a person is filling out this form and you want to ask them what their favorite subjects are, you're allowing this person to select and choose multiple subjects. The next area is using the drop-down, and when a person fills this out, then they're only given the option to choose one of these favorite subjects. The next one is using a radio button. This is similar to the drop-down in that you can only choose one specific subject, but you get to see the entire list within this view here. Something to note about using a radio button is that you typically wouldn't want to use a radio button unless you're very sure that the answer is going to be a common answer. And the reason for that is because the very first selection is automatically chosen. This is opposed to the checkboxes where the person has to choose something, or the drop-down where the person has to select something. When you use the radio button, the very first option is automatically chosen, so you'll just want to be careful if you do use the radio button. And then this last one down here is for the rating scale, the Likert scale. And so I'm asking the question, how much do you enjoy hamburgers? And then a person can come in here and they can fill out, and they can only choose one. How often do they enjoy hamburgers? And you can see that they're only allowed to choose one before they submit it. So now that we've seen examples of all of the different multiple select options, let's walk through and recreate what we see here. So for this first option here, using the checkbox, the question that we're going to ask is favorite subjects. We'll make it required, and then underneath type, we're going to choose checkbox. Now, I'm going to jump over this section here first, and I'll come back to it to explain what a lot of these options mean. So underneath these options, I am now going to recreate these different boxes that we see here. So now that I've recreated those different options, a few things you should know is if you want to remove one of these, you can simply click on the garbage can icon that you see here, and say OK. And then you could click on the add option button to re-add that. And then you can also change the order by clicking on the arrow buttons here that you see. So now that we've added those in there, I'm going to go back up to these checkboxes here and kind of explain what these mean. So this first box here says options are limited to a number of responses. So for this example, let's say when we place a check in there, you can see that there's now a new box that appears for limit. For this form, let's say that we only want, for each one of these subjects, we only want 10 people to sign up for each one. So if I come in here and type in the number 10 for each one, that means that when a person fills out the form and they select each one of these boxes, that only 10 people can fill this out before that option is not available. And so now that I've put that in to those boxes, I've refreshed our example page. You can see over here underneath favorite subjects now, it will show how many are available for each one of those check boxes. Okay, now the next box that you see here is for options are available based on specific dates. And so when I place a check in there, you see that we now have these 2 additional columns, which is for an enable date and a disable date. And what this simply means is that, let's say that for the option of math, we want this date to not be available immediately, but let's say we want this to be available in a couple days. So you can choose which date you want it to be shown. So for this example, we're picking this a couple days ahead. So now when I refresh my example page over here, you can kind of see, it's hard to see, but because we've enabled this math option to not be available immediately, you can see that math is grayed out and I'm not able to check on it. And so you could do the exact same in the opposite direction as well. And so if I say that this option is not available after a certain day, you can choose that as well, and it will be grayed out like you see with this. Okay, so I'm going to uncheck these two options, and I'm going to put a check in this box, which is options will cause specific people to receive an email. So what this means is, let's say for this form, you have a person who's in charge of math, you have a person in charge of history, English, etc. So what you can tell the form builder to do is that whenever somebody comes in and checks the box for music and submits it, this person will then receive an email indicating that somebody has filled out the form and checked that box. Now, the results won't be in the email, so the email will not reveal any information. The email will simply say that there's a new form submitted that you should probably look at. So that is what that checkbox does. And then the last checkbox that we see here is show option for not listed, please specify. This would be formerly known as the other box. And so if I place a check in there, and then if I refresh our page over here, you will see that our using checkboxes option over here, we now have an additional checkbox that's not listed, but it says not listed here because we've placed a check in this box. So you'll see what will happen is when I check on this, I now have a text box available to which somebody can type in. So in this example, let's say this person's favorite subject is chemistry. So you're allowing the person to enter in their own option because we've checked this box that says show other option. Now, this next checkbox that you see here for minimum/maximum number of choices, what this does is if you place a check in here, this is telling the person filling out the form that they must have a minimum of X amount of choices selected or a maximum of X amount of choices selected. So for this example where we're asking for the person's favorite subjects, let's say you want the person to choose at least 2, but no more than 4. So I'm going to hit save and let's refresh our page. And with it refreshed, now you'll see that beneath the favorite subjects, we have this italicized text that says, please select between 2 to 4 options. So the person filling this out now must choose at least 2 options, but cannot choose more than 4. If they try to submit it, a pop-up will appear that says, you've selected too many or you've selected too few. Now, an advanced feature of the multiple select options is the ability to have specific options shown when you choose something. So what do I mean by that? So if we look at this first set of checkboxes for favorite subjects, you can see that if we check in math, history, English, nothing happens. However, you'll notice that if I place a check in the box for music, I am given an additional set of questions to which I need to answer. And so this is going off of the logic that you see down here, which is display based on another question's response. And so what you can do is you can have additional questions appear based off of the response that a person checks. So let me walk you through how to create this. Now for the next section here, I'm simply going to talk about the fact that we've just explained how to use the checkbox. Now for these other options, such as the drop down, the radio button, and the Likert scale, the logic is the exact same. The difference is that you would simply choose this drop down here, and instead of saying checkbox, you would select which one you want it to be. So again, you can choose between the checkbox, the drop down, the radio button, and the Likert scale. And so they're all very similar with how the logic works and how the options work. It's just a matter of which type of multiple select you want to use. And we talked about the different types of multiple selects over here in our example. Okay, so let me go back to the form that we are editing here, and let me show you how to create that additional questions that I just showed you. So what you'll want to do is, we've already created this multiple select field with the favorite subjects, and we have all of our different options in here. So what we're going to want to do is we want to add in an additional multiple select field into our form. So we have the entry for the favorite subjects, and now we have a completely separate one. So I'm going to double click on this to select it. And if you remember, we want to ask, what are your favorite genres of music? So what we want to do is we want the person, when they check the box for music as their favorite subject, we then want to ask them, well, what are your favorite genres of music? So then what we'll do is we're going to select the type. And so we'll say that this will be a checkbox. And then we can add in all of our options here. So I'm going to type these in here. So now we have all of our different options added into our multiple select. Now, the big difference between, I'm going to click on Save here. The difference between this one, which asks for our subjects, and this one, which is going to ask for the specific genre of music, is this option that we're going to select, which says Display based on another question's response. So currently it's selected for this will always be displayed. I'm going to change this to say this will only be displayed because of a response to another question. Now this box appears which says what other question will cause this question to hide or show. And so we're going to select the previous question, which is what is the favorite subjects? And then which response do we want these questions to appear from? And we're going to check the box for music. So now I'm going to click on Save, and you'll see back in the form builder that there's this little information box that appears that says this will only be displayed because of a response to another question. So let me save this, and now I'm going to preview the form that we've just created. And so you can see now we've got our form that we've been working on. You check on math, nothing happens. History, nothing happens. English, nothing happens. But when we check on music, there, the additional questions then appear because we placed the check there. So as a recap, if I go back to our form and click the Edit button, the reason why these questions appear for checking music and nothing else is because in the form itself, we've created a separate multiple select field. And within this multiple select field, we have chosen that this question or these questions are only to be displayed when another option is selected, which is the favorite subjects, and then there's a check in music. One last thing I want to mention about the ability to have an option appear because of a previous question's response. So for the example I showed with the music, then showing the different genres of music that we've created, you can also have really anything within the form builder appear because of a previous question's response. And so what I mean by that is, let's just say, for example, I'm going to choose text area. And so here's our new text area. And if I double click on it, you will see this option where you have the ability to display based on another question's response with a lot of different elements within the form builder. And so I'm going to say underneath favorite subjects, math, we're just going to call this text area. So now what will happen is when I do a save and preview, you'll see that from before we had the example with music. When you check on it, it shows the different categories of music. Now if you check on math, you should see down here at the bottom that this text area now appears. So if I uncheck it, that text area disappears. I check it, that appears. So the ability to have something appear based off of another response is really available throughout the form builder and not just limited to the multiple select. You can have it for essentially any one of these options. For example, if I click on image, you can see that that also has the ability to be displayed because of another question's response. Now, the last thing I want to show you is that with this form, we've been specifically dealing with checkboxes, but I want to just show you that it doesn't matter which type of multiple select you choose. It can work for all of them. So for this example, let's say we change this from a checkbox to a radio button, and now if I hit save, if we preview this form, I just want to show you that even though we're doing a checkbox here, if I check the box in for music, you can see that now these options are a radio button. And so the logic of how it works applies for no matter which type of multiple select you choose in this box. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about with the form builder is this box here, which is for the states, majors, semesters, etc. So once I add that to the form and then I double click on it, you'll see that it asks for the question. So you can put the question in this box, required yes or no. And then if I click on the drop down for type, you'll see that we have a bunch of different options within here. And to kind of show what these are is, for example, if I click on class, over here on the right hand side in this example form, you will see that when you put the class field in, it will automatically generate these two drop downs where a person can come in here and they can enter in the subject. So for example, if you're asking a person for a particular class, they could come in here, they can specify which class it is, and then you can also see that it has the course designation there. Next in the drop down is for country, and if you were to select country underneath the type, as an example, you can see over here, it will then generate a list of all the countries that are available. And moving down the list, you'll see there's department, which does the same thing. It will list all of the different departments at Grand Valley. Ethnicity will give you the option of these checkboxes that are available, to which a person can check. Major and minor both work in the exact same way, where it will have a pre-generated list of all of the majors and minors at Grand Valley. And then with semester, the semester will allow you to choose a start year, an end year, and the order. So if you're asking for a particular semester and you want to start in the year 2000, you could select that there. And then you can see when you, as the example over here on the right-hand side, whatever you choose, the person who is filling out the form can then select whichever semester that they want to. And then last in this list is for the state province. And if you were to select the state province, you can see in this drop-down that it has a list of all the states and the different provinces that are available. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is the option for the file upload, which is this button that you see here. If you click on this to add it to your form and then double click on it to edit it, you'll see it asks for the question, and then it'll also ask for required yes or no. So as an example, let's say that you create a form and you're wanting someone to upload their resume. And so let's say we type in the word resume for the question. And then down here, you have the ability to specify which file type gets uploaded. And so as an example, with the resume, we're likely looking for a document. And then once you click on document, you can see that it also will specify and you can say exactly what type of document you want. So let's say for this example, we only want PDFs to be submitted. So I would choose document, I would then place a check in PDF, and then down here you will also see that you can have a maximum file size. And so as a rule of thumb, you can see we have a 10 megabyte limit for the file size attachment. So you can even specify and say that the resume has to be under 5 megabytes. And then there's also this option here that has upload instructions. And then you can say use default instructions or use custom instructions where you can type in your own instructions. And so if I look over here on the right hand side at my example, you will see that we have this box here for resume. And then there's this text below here that says, please upload a file, etc. And this is because we have this option selected for use the default instructions. I could type in my own instructions if I want to, and then that text would appear here. And then once I've done that, the person who is filling out the form can then select choose file, and then it would take them to their local drive for them to upload a file of their choice. Next, we can add in this button here, which is the paragraph, to our form. And so when you add the paragraph, this is an area in which you can put in a section of text that it maybe have pertinent information. So over here on our example, you can see that I've copied and pasted this text here. And if I paste it in there, you can see that as an example. And so when you use the paragraph, just know that this is not an area for someone to fill in information who's filling out the form. This is an area in which the form will display information. So this is for showing something, not for a person filling out something. The next thing that you can add to the form is a picture using this icon here that says image. And so once you add that to the form and you double click on it, using the file manager, you can click on this button here. It will bring you to the file manager, and then you can choose whichever picture you want to add to your form. So for example, I chose this picture here. You then have to enter in the alt text for it. So we'll enter in rocket ship. And then you can also put a URL if you want to, so that if somebody clicked on the picture, it would take them to a website. And so you can see over here in our example that we've got our form, and then we've got the picture of the rocket ship right here. The next button that you will see is this icon here, which is for signature. And so if you are needing to create a form in which a person can then do an electronic signature for, this is the button that you would use for that. So I added that to our form, and when I double click on it, let's say that we enter in here for the question, confirmation of signature. And then underneath the signature prompt, this could be your disclaimer. So say something like this. And so there is my signature prompt there. And then I can click on save. And so then if you look over here on the right-hand side on my example, you can see we've got the confirmation signature, we've got the text there, and then in this white box that you see here, what a person would do is they would actually come in here and they would sign like they would a piece of paper. And then you can click this button here that says clear and says okay. And so by adding in the signature prompt, you're making it so that somebody can electronically sign for something. And then the last two buttons that you see over here on the right-hand side are essentially shortcuts. So the first one is called group, name, email, phone. And so what we've done is we've created these shortcuts where if you click on those, it will automatically put into your form these fields that are very common. So instead of manually creating a text box field for first name, last name, email, phone, instead you can click on this button here to add in all of those in one swoop. So that's the first button that we've clicked on, which is the name, email, phone. The next one is for address, and so if I click on that, you can see then it brings in all the different address fields into the form. So these are just different shortcuts that you can use, which eliminates the need to manually recreate every single one of these fields.